The boy lived in a neighborhood where life was not easy. The houses were small and broken, the streets were crowded with noise, and money was always short. He was a poor black boy, but he had a kind heart. People often ignored him because of his torn clothes and old shoes. At school, some classmates laughed at him, and others acted like he did not exist. Yet inside, he carried a quiet strength. He knew how hard life was for his family, but he never stopped trying to help his mother and younger siblings. Every morning, he would wake up early to deliver newspapers, and after school, he sometimes washed cars or carried bags for strangers at the market. His earnings were little, but every coin he gave to his mother meant food on the table. That evening, after a long day of running errands, he walked home with tired steps. His backpack was heavy, though it only had old books and a broken pencil case inside. He looked up at the sunset, the sky painted with shades of red and orange, and he sighed. Life felt endless, like a road that had no end. Still, he walked on, because that was what he had learned: keep moving, keep surviving. As he passed through a narrow street filled with old apartments, something strange caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the wind moving a curtain, but then he stopped and listened carefully. A faint cry echoed from inside one of the buildings. It was weak, almost like a whisper. He frowned and looked closer. The sound came from behind a door on the second floor. His heart started to race. He climbed the old wooden stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The hallway smelled of dust and dampness, and the walls were cracked. He reached the door and knocked loudly. "Hello? Is anyone inside?" he called out. Silence answered him at first, then a faint groan followed. He pressed his ear against the door and heard shallow breathing. Fear gripped him. His first thought was to run and call someone else. He was just a poor boy, what could he do? But something stronger than fear rose inside him. He thought of his mother, who often fell sick but still pushed herself to work. He thought of his younger sister, who once had trouble breathing during a fever. He could not walk away knowing someone was suffering inside. He tried the handle, but the door was locked. Panic grew as he knocked again and again, shouting louder this time. Still no answer came, only the weak sound of gasping breaths. He looked around the hallway. There was no one there. His legs trembled, but he knew waiting could mean the person inside might not survive. With determination, he stepped back, took a deep breath, and threw his shoulder against the door. The first hit hurt, and the wood barely moved. He groaned but did not stop. He tried again, harder this time, his body crashing against the old door. The noise echoed through the empty hallway. On the third try, the lock snapped, and the door flew open with a loud crack. The room inside was dim. Curtains were drawn, and the air was heavy. On the floor, near a small table, lay an elderly woman. Her face was pale, and her body shook with weak breaths. She reached out a trembling hand toward him, her eyes filled with desperation. The boy rushed to her side, his heart pounding faster than ever before. "Don't worry, I'm here," he whispered, though he was not sure what to do. He quickly looked around. The woman's phone was on the table, but it had fallen out of reach. He picked it up and called for help, his hands shaking as he explained the situation. The woman's lips moved as if to speak, but no sound came. The boy gently held her hand, telling her to stay awake, to keep breathing. Minutes felt like hours as he sat there, fear pressing down on him, but he refused to leave her side. Finally, footsteps thundered on the stairs. Neighbors, drawn by the noise of the door breaking, rushed in. Some gasped at the sight of the boy holding the woman, while others quickly called for an ambulance. The boy stepped aside as adults lifted her carefully and carried her to safety. His chest still heaved from the effort, but relief washed over him. Outside, red and blue lights soon flashed as the ambulance arrived. Paramedics took over, checking the woman's pulse and giving her oxygen. The boy stood quietly, his clothes covered in dust from the broken door, his arms sore from forcing it open. He felt invisible again, standing at the side, until one of the neighbors pointed at him. "He's the one who saved her," the neighbor said loudly. Everyone turned to look at him. For a moment, he wanted to disappear. He wasn't used to people's eyes on him. But then, as he looked at the woman being placed inside the ambulance, he realized something important: his courage had kept her alive. He had done something that mattered. As the ambulance doors closed and the siren began to wail, the boy stood frozen on the sidewalk. The street was now filled with whispers and stares, people asking who he was and why he had risked himself. But he did not answer. He only knew in his heart that when someone needed help, he could not walk away. That night, as he walked back to his small home, he carried something different inside him. His life was still poor, his shoes still broken, but there was a new fire in his chest. He had discovered a strength he never knew he had. The boy woke up the next morning with the memory of last night still heavy in his mind. He could still hear the sound of the door breaking and the weak breathing of the old woman. His arms ached from the effort, and a small bruise had formed on his shoulder, but he didn't care. What mattered most to him was that she was alive. His mother noticed the way he looked tired, and she asked if everything was fine. He smiled faintly and said yes, because he did not want to worry her. She already carried enough burdens. He put on his faded shirt, picked up his worn-out bag, and went to school like every other day. When he reached school, he felt something strange. People were whispering and pointing at him. Usually, when others pointed, it was because of his old shoes or torn clothes, but this time their voices were different. There was surprise in their tone. As he walked past a group of boys, one of them said, "That's him. He's the one who broke down the door." The boy froze, unsure of what to say. Word had spread faster than he expected. Some students looked at him with curiosity, others with respect, and even a few with envy. During recess, a teacher called him to the office. He thought he might be in trouble for breaking into someone's apartment, but instead he found a group of teachers waiting for him. They asked him to sit down and tell them what had happened. Nervously, he explained everything: the cries, the locked door, and how he had forced it open. The teachers listened closely, their faces serious, but when he finished, one of them patted his shoulder and said, "You were brave. You saved her life." The boy left the office with mixed feelings. He had never been called brave before. At home, his mother often said he was kind and helpful, but the world outside had rarely noticed him. He walked back to class feeling like the air around him had changed. That afternoon, something even more surprising happened. As he walked home, a local reporter stopped him near the street corner. She had a microphone and a cameraman with her. "Are you the boy who saved the old woman last night?" she asked. His first instinct was to run, because he wasn't used to attention, but he nodded quietly. The reporter smiled warmly and began asking him questions. "What made you do it? Weren't you afraid?" He answered softly, saying he didn't think about fear, he only thought about helping her. His words were simple, but they carried honesty, and that honesty touched everyone who heard the interview. The news spread quickly that evening. His face appeared on television, his voice on the radio, and his picture in the local newspaper. Neighbors who once ignored him now stopped to greet him. Some shook his hand, some praised him, and some even told their children to learn from his courage. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be seen. Meanwhile, the old woman he had saved was recovering in the hospital. Her family had been by her side, thankful beyond words. When they heard the full story of how the boy had broken down the door, they were overwhelmed with gratitude. Her daughter said, "We need to find that boy and thank him properly." They made calls and asked around until they discovered where he lived. 2 days later, As the boy returned home from school, he found a car parked outside his small house. It was shiny and new, very different from the vehicles usually seen in his neighborhood. Out stepped a well-dressed woman and a young man. They smiled at him and asked if he was the boy who had helped their mother. He nodded shyly. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she said, "Because of you, she is alive today. We can never repay what you did." The boy stood there, not knowing how to respond. He wasn't used to praise or gratitude. All he could say was, "I just did what I could." The woman hugged him tightly, and for a moment he felt the warmth of a family that wasn't his own. That evening, his mother listened as the visitors explained everything. They promised to invite him to the hospital once their mother was strong enough to meet him. His mother's eyes shone with pride as she looked at her son. "You have done something great," she whispered after the visitors left. "Sometimes life gives us moments to prove who we are. You proved your heart is pure." Days turned into weeks, and the story of his bravery continued to spread. At the grocery store, strangers smiled at him. At school, teachers called him an example for others. Even children from different blocks came to see him, asking what it felt like to save someone's life. The boy answered humbly, always saying the same thing, "I just couldn't walk away." One afternoon, his school organized a small assembly. He was asked to stand on the stage while the principal told the story of his bravery to the entire student body. Applause filled the hall, and for the first time, the boy who had always sat quietly in the back was at the center of attention. His hands shook, but his heart swelled with pride. At night, when he lay in bed, he thought about how quickly things had changed. He was still poor, his shoes still had holes, and his family still struggled. Yet something inside him was different. People no longer saw him as just a poor boy from the corner street. They saw him as someone who mattered. He realized that sometimes one decision, one act of courage, could change how the world looked at you. As he drifted to sleep, he wondered what would happen next. He had no idea that the biggest change in his life was still to come. The woman he saved was not just any woman. She carried a story, a name, and a power that would soon reach into his life and alter his path forever. The day finally came when the boy was invited to the hospital to meet the woman he had saved. His mother pressed his hand before he left and whispered, "Be polite, my son. Show respect. This meeting may change your life." He nodded nervously. His clothes were still old, but his mother had washed them carefully so they looked neat. He wore his only good pair of shoes, though the soles were thin. As he sat in the car sent by the woman's family, he stared out the window, amazed at how far he was traveling from his little neighborhood. The roads grew wider, the buildings taller, and the cars newer. He had never seen this part of the city before. When they reached the hospital, he stepped out with shaky legs. The air smelled clean, and the building looked grand, with glass walls and shining floors. He followed the woman's daughter down the hall. Every step felt heavier, as if he was walking into a moment that would stay in his heart forever. Finally, they stopped at a private room. The door opened slowly, and there she was, the old woman lying in bed, her eyes brighter now, her face full of life again. The moment she saw him, her expression changed. A soft smile spread across her lips, and her weak hand reached out toward him. "So you are the boy who saved me," she said in a trembling but warm voice. He walked closer, shyly lowering his head, and gently held her hand. "Yes, ma'am," he replied softly. "I just did what I could." Tears welled in her eyes. "No, child," she whispered, "you did more than anyone else would have. You gave me back my life." They talked for a while. She asked about his family, his school, and his dreams. At first, he answered with short words, not used to being the center of someone's attention. But her kindness made him open up. He spoke about his mother working hard, about his siblings, and how he tried to help. He admitted that sometimes life felt too heavy for him, but he always wanted to do what was right. The woman listened carefully, nodding at every word. Her daughter and son stood nearby, surprised at how much their mother was touched by this boy. After a while, she said something that shocked him. "Do you know who I am?" she asked gently. He shook his head. To him, she was just a woman who needed saving. She smiled faintly. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I was once a judge in this city. For many years, I fought for justice and fairness. Now I work to help poor families through a charity foundation." The boy's eyes widened. He had heard her name before. Teachers sometimes spoke of her when talking about fairness and community service. But he never thought the woman lying in front of him was the same person. Her daughter leaned in and added, "Mother has helped build schools, hospitals, and shelters. Many people in the city know her. She has done so much for others, but that night she needed someone, and you were there." The boy felt his heart beat faster. He realized he hadn't just saved any woman, he had saved someone who had shaped lives for decades. He didn't know what to say, so he whispered, "I'm glad I was there." Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. "Bravery does not come from wealth or power," she said. "It comes from the heart. And you, my boy, have a heart stronger than many men I've known." Her words sank deep into him, warming him in a way no applause or praise ever had. The days that followed were full of surprises. The media picked up her story. Headlines read, "Former judge saved by brave teen and young hero rescues community leader." The boy's face was shown everywhere, and suddenly people treated him like he mattered. But what touched him most was how Evelyn treated him. She spoke to him as if he were her own grandson, asking about his studies and telling him stories from her life. She wanted to know what he dreamed of becoming, what he loved, and what worried him. One afternoon, as he visited her again, she handed him a small notebook. "Write your dreams in here," she told him. "Every goal, every hope. Don't ever think they are too big. When I was young, I wrote my dreams in a book like this. Years later, I made many of them come true. You must believe the same is possible for you." He held the notebook tightly, as if it were a treasure. No one had ever told him to dream before. Most people only told him to survive. A week later, Evelyn invited his mother and siblings to the hospital. She wanted to meet the family of the boy who had saved her. His mother was nervous, but Evelyn welcomed her warmly. She told her, "Your son is special. He has courage and goodness inside him. You should be proud." His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "I have always been proud, but no one else ever saw him the way I did. Thank you for seeing him." Evelyn promised that once she was strong enough to leave the hospital, she would do something for the boy and his family. "I owe my life to him," she said. "But more than that, I want to make sure his future shines." The boy listened quietly, his heart racing with hope and confusion. He wasn't sure what she meant, but something told him that his life was about to change. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn recovered quickly. She kept her promise. She invited the boy and his family to her large home once she was discharged. The house stood like a palace compared to their small apartment. As they walked through the wide hallways, they were in awe of the beautiful furniture, the paintings on the walls, and the garden filled with flowers. For the boy, it felt like stepping into another world. At dinner, Evelyn announced her decision. She said she wanted to sponsor the boy's education, to give him every opportunity he deserved. "I see in him not just a rescuer," she explained, "but a leader, someone who will give back to others one day. He saved me, and now I want to help him find the life he was meant to live." His mother gasped, unable to hold back her tears. His siblings clapped with excitement. The boy sat silently, overwhelmed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Evelyn looked at him kindly and said, "This is only the beginning. You saved my life. Now let me help shape yours. That night, as he returned home, the boy could not sleep. He thought about everything: the fire in his chest when he broke down that door, the moment he first held Evelyn's hand, and now this promise of a brighter future. He realized that one act of courage had opened a path he never imagined. But deep in his heart, he also made a promise to himself. He would not let pride or comfort change who he was. He would remain the same boy who chose to help, no matter how hard life was. Because it was that choice, born from love and bravery, that had changed everything. The days after Evelyn's recovery felt like a dream for the boy. His world, which once seemed so small, now stretched into places he never imagined. School, which had always been a tiring routine, suddenly felt brighter. Teachers who once barely noticed him now spoke his name with pride. His classmates whispered less about his old shoes and more about his bravery. He felt shy with all the attention, but inside, his heart glowed with a new kind of hope. Evelyn kept her promise. She arranged for him to meet with her lawyer and representatives from her foundation. They sat with his mother in their tiny living room, and papers were laid out on the table. The boy watched as his mother's hands trembled, afraid she might make a mistake, but Evelyn's people explained everything kindly. A scholarship would cover his school fees, uniforms, and books. They even promised support for his siblings so they could continue their education without worry. His mother wept quietly, wiping her face with the corner of her scarf. She whispered, "God sent you to us," and Evelyn placed her hand over hers, saying, "Your son is a blessing to this world." The boy noticed how the air in his home felt lighter after that day. For so long, the walls had echoed with silence and worry about bills, rent, and food. Now there was laughter again. His siblings chattered about their future. One wanted to be a teacher, another dreamed of becoming a doctor. His mother smiled more often, her face looking younger, as if years of struggle had lifted away. Soon, the community also stepped in. The local council organized a small ceremony in his honor. He stood on a wooden stage in front of neighbors who had once walked past him without a glance. A banner read, "Celebrating our young hero." The mayor gave a speech, saying courage like his was rare and should inspire everyone. When the boy's name was called, people cheered and clapped loudly. He walked slowly to the stage, his knees shaking, but he remembered Evelyn's words, "Hold your head high. You deserve this." So he stood tall, accepted the certificate of bravery, and said only one sentence when asked to speak, "I just wanted to help." His simple words touched the crowd more than a long speech ever could. The story spread further. Local newspapers followed up with more articles. Photographers came to take his picture, sometimes asking him to pose with Evelyn. One article described him as a boy with nothing who gave everything. Another wrote, "Courage wears no uniform, it lives in the heart." Each time he read these words, he felt humbled, almost embarrassed, because in his mind he was still the same boy from the poor streets. But he could not deny that his life was changing. Evelyn introduced him to new people. She invited him to events where important community leaders gathered. He met businessmen, teachers, and even politicians. At first, he stood silently in corners, not knowing how to speak or what to say. His clothes were simple compared to their suits, and he worried they would laugh at him. But Evelyn always placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "This is the boy who saved me. Treat him with the respect he deserves." Suddenly, the room would turn, and eyes that once looked past him now looked at him with admiration. One evening, Evelyn took him to a gathering at a large hall filled with bright lights and music. There, she asked him to share his story. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, silence filled the room. He told them how he had heard the cries, how fear almost made him run, but how something inside him refused to let him walk away. By the time he finished, people stood and clapped. Some even had tears in their eyes. The boy realized that his story was no longer just his, it had become a message of courage for others. Back in school, he noticed a shift. Children who once ignored him now asked to sit beside him. Teachers gave him encouragement, and even the principal spoke of him during assemblies. One teacher pulled him aside and said, "You've reminded us what real bravery looks like. It's not in books or lessons, it's in actions." Those words stayed with him, reminding him that his choices mattered. But not everything was easy. Fame brought challenges too. Some boys whispered that he was lucky, not brave. Others said he was only getting attention because of Evelyn. At first, their words hurt. He lay awake at night wondering if they were right. But then he remembered the moment he broke that door, the pain in his shoulder, the sound of the woman's breath. He had been alone then. No cameras, no applause. He had acted because it was the right thing to do, not because of what might follow. That thought gave him strength. As weeks passed, Evelyn began mentoring him personally. She gave him books to read about history, leaders, and courage. She encouraged him to study harder, to believe he could go further than his current life allowed. "You have a gift," she told him. "Not just bravery, but a heart that cares. That's the kind of heart the world needs in its leaders." Her words planted seeds in his mind. He began to imagine a future beyond the narrow streets of his neighborhood. Perhaps he could become a lawyer, a teacher, or even someone who built homes for the poor. The boy's mother noticed the change too. She saw her son sitting at night under the dim light, reading with focus instead of falling asleep from exhaustion. She saw him writing in the small notebook Evelyn had given him, filling pages with dreams and plans. Sometimes she would quietly peek and read lines like, "I want to help children who have nothing. I want to make my mother proud. I want to be someone who never forgets where he came from." Months went by, and opportunities kept opening. He was invited to speak at other schools, where children listened wide-eyed as he told his story. He became a symbol of hope, proof that one act of kindness could ripple into something greater. Strangers recognized him on the street, some shaking his hand, some patting his back. And each time, he stayed humble, never allowing the praise to make him forget who he was. Yet through all of this, he remained grounded. He still helped his mother carry groceries. He still played with his siblings in the small yard. He still greeted neighbors politely. The fame came and went like waves, but his roots stayed firm in the soil of his upbringing. As the year drew to a close, Evelyn invited him to a holiday dinner at her home. Around the table sat leaders, teachers, and community workers. They spoke of future plans, new schools, and projects to help the poor. Evelyn turned to him and asked, "What do you think we should do next?" For the first time, he didn't feel like a poor boy sitting among powerful people. He felt like someone whose voice mattered. Slowly, he spoke of building safe spaces for children, of giving them books, and of teaching them that they were not forgotten. The table grew silent as everyone listened, and Evelyn smiled with pride. That night, as he returned home, he thought about how far he had come. Only months ago, he was invisible, walking the streets with his head down. Now, doors were opening in every direction. He realized that opportunities were not just gifts, they were responsibilities. And he promised himself he would use every chance not only for himself but for those still living in the shadows he had once known. The seasons changed, and with them, the boy's life continued to grow in ways he never imagined. Winter came with cold winds, but inside his home, warmth returned not from money or fine things, but from hope. His mother smiled more often, his siblings studied with brighter eyes, and he felt a steady strength building within him. The memory of breaking down that door remained as clear as ever, but now it was more than a memory. It was the beginning of everything that followed. Evelyn became a constant guide in his life. She invited him often to her house, not just for meals, but for conversations that stretched into long evenings. She told him about the many battles she had fought in her career, about standing up for truth even when it was hard, and about the importance of giving back to those who had less. He listened closely, drinking in every word. Sometimes she would pause, look at him, and say, "One day, you will be the one telling these stories to others." Those words filled him with both pride and responsibility. At school, he grew more confident. His grades improved because Evelyn had arranged tutors who helped him understand lessons that once seemed impossible. His teachers saw a new determination in him. They praised not only his bravery but also his effort to study harder. "You are an example for others now," one teacher told him. "Keep walking this path." And so, he did. But it wasn't only about him anymore. The boy felt a pull inside his heart to give back. One afternoon, he gathered a few younger children from his neighborhood and sat with them in the park. He told them his story, not to boast, but to remind them that they too could be brave and strong. He encouraged them to dream beyond what they saw in front of them. The children listened with shining eyes, and he realized how powerful it was to inspire others. As months turned into a year, the boy was invited to more schools and community centers to share his journey. Each time he spoke, he grew less nervous. His voice carried more weight, and his story touched more lives. People often came up to him afterward, thanking him for reminding them that courage could be found in anyone, no matter how poor or overlooked. He always answered humbly, saying, "I am just a boy who couldn't walk away when someone needed help." His mother watched proudly as her son became a figure of hope. She often whispered prayers at night, grateful for the chance he had been given. His siblings too walked taller at school, proud to say they were related to him. The family's struggles didn't disappear overnight, but life was no longer filled with despair. They now carried a sense of dignity that poverty had once stolen from them. Evelyn, true to her word, continued to support his journey. She set aside funds for his future education, making sure he would have the chance to attend a good college when the time came. She also included him in her charity events, allowing him to see firsthand how lives could be changed through kindness and action. The boy began helping distribute food, collect books for children, and even speak at small gatherings where families in need came for help. He discovered a joy in serving others, a joy even greater than the applause he sometimes received. But he also learned lessons about humility. Fame could be fleeting, and he knew it. Sometimes the attention slowed, and people forgot for a while. But Evelyn reminded him, what matters is not whether the world claps for you. What matters is whether you continue to live with courage and kindness. He carried those words like a shield in his heart. Years later, when he was older, he looked back at that night, the night he broke down the door, and realized it had shaped every step that followed. Without that moment, he might still have been invisible, walking through life without direction. But that one choice had set him on a path filled with light. He often spoke about it in his speeches. "Courage is not about being strong or rich," he would say. "It is about listening to the voice inside you that says, 'Do not walk away.' It is about caring for others even when you are afraid." His words inspired not only children but also adults who had forgotten the value of compassion. The boy, once poor and unseen, grew into a young man with dreams bigger than himself. He wanted to study law, inspired by Evelyn's past as a judge. He hoped to stand for justice, to fight for those who had no voice. Evelyn encouraged him every step of the way, often saying, "You saved me, but in truth, you saved yourself that night. You proved who you are meant to be." One evening, after giving a talk at a local hall, he returned home and found his siblings waiting at the door. They hugged him tightly, telling him how proud they were. His mother, standing behind them, smiled with tears in her eyes. "You were once just my little boy with old shoes and tired eyes," she said. "Now, you are a light for many. But to me, you will always be the same son who never gave up." As he lay in bed that night, he opened the small notebook Evelyn had given him long ago. Many pages were now filled with dreams and goals. Some had already come true. Others were still waiting. He read the first line he had written months earlier: "I want to make my mother proud." He closed the book with a smile, knowing he had already done that. Life had not been easy, and challenges still lay ahead. But he had learned something priceless: one act of courage could open doors no one expected. That night when he chose to help, when he broke down the door to save a dying woman, he had unknowingly broken down the door to his own future. And what followed truly changed his life forever.